childcare. And there were quite a few changes made on the House side. And then, Mr. Chair, I do have some amendments, but does anyone need a review from our reviser on the contents or the changes made by the House? Seeing none, I think we're ready then to proceed to the work. So if you're okay, Mr. Chair, I do have a couple of amendments, and we'll start with the one, Jenna, that's labeled cabinet. So I will attempt to explain this, and Jenna can correct me or jump in, but what this does is the makeup of the children's cabinet, you guys had changed that to 10 members instead of the 9 that currently exist. And there's a concern with having an even number. So what we are proposing is to add a member to make it an odd number. And that member would be appointed by the majority leader of the Senate, and that way the Senate has 3 and the House has 3. So we will let you discuss that.
If I may provide one clarification, it would be an odd number of voting members because there are, I believe, A through G are non-voting members. So this would make 11 voting members.
Madam Chair, this would be a legislative member? Correct. Okay.
Legislative member needs to be up there.
One clarification, you'll make sure that it's clear that it's a legislative member. Okay,
Yes,
good, got it.
Yes.
You're good with that? You're good with that? Discussion? We're acceptable with that.
Thank you. The second amendment, Jenna, we will take as ratios. Jen, I might let you go ahead and take a stab at this since I already messed up the first one that had the easy one, so I will let you explain this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This would add language on, let's see, this would be section 3 and probably 4, that the executive director or the secretary, who's ever has the authority to adopt rules and regulations at this point in time, would not adopt any rule and regulation establishing a minimum staff to child infant ratio that's more restrictive than 1 staff member to 4 infants, and this would be for either a child care home or a child care center.
I guess just trying to understand, just so that I understand what we're trying to do here. We're trying to say that in the future,
there could be no rules and regulations that exceed this ratio, which has the effect of putting the ratio into statute, which I think is something we were trying to avoid in the initial discussion and deliberations with all the interested parties.
Thank you, Representative. I appreciate the question clarification. So what I would propose is language more around, rather than having the 4-to-1 in statute, maybe putting not less than 4. So it could go, they could raise it, but they couldn't lower that, below that floor, so to speak.
All right, so clarification question. I believe the ratios are currently regulated at 3, and would this change that to 4?
Yes.
It does change it to 4, okay.
Yes.
This would not automatically change the regulation, but it would make, the current regulation would then be in contradiction with the statute, so it would make it void, and they would have to adopt a new regulation if they wanted to have a ratio.
Thank you. I was wondering if this would still be in compliance with all the federal rules and regulations for childcare and infant care?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't believe that there's any federal regulations that restrict these ratios, but I am aware from testimony last year that there were several states that had ratios that were less restrictive than Kansas's. I believe that the 1-to-4 was fairly common among other states.
Can we have a few minutes? Absolutely. Okay. 5 minutes? No. Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair, one of the issues I have, and I want to see if we can have a conversation about maybe backing away from this a little bit. We had a lot of conversations on the House side about the ratios and how the difficulty of having that cemented in statute versus the flexibility that's available in regulations process. And in my view, and I think there's some agreement on this side, the view is that this is in effect kind of putting that back into statute, which is something we worked really hard to try to get away from. And I guess I just want to have that discussion about if there's a way to satisfy your concerns without being so specific that we're putting that back into statute.
Discussing it with my Senate cohorts, our concern with bringing this was that we want to make sure, childcare is such a huge issue, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything to maximize availability and affordability in all areas. And so that was our concern. We certainly want to make sure that we're maximizing, not minimizing. And so we are going to act in good faith and hope that all of the parties and agencies involved do the same. And so we will accept not putting it in statute. We acknowledge that's very restrictive and agencies do need flexibility, but just know that we are concerned about making sure we're maximizing slots and not minimizing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to state one thing too, I guess, for timeline to know. We have July 1, 2024 is when we're going to know. So if they do not act in good faith, then we can hold them accountable the next legislative session.
We're just getting warmed up, Mr. Chair. So appreciate that. Thank you, Representative. I do have one final amendment I'd like to bring, and Jenna, it's exempt. And Mr. Chair, if I may, I'll explain kind of the rationale and then let Jenna go through the legalese of what this does. But in the interim on childcare that I was on, as well as several of you, One of the concerns we had is there's a practice in which unlicensed home-based childcare centers or providers are not allowed to watch a child that's not related to them or children more than 20 hours a week, or else it's considered black market or illegal. And in reality, there are a lot of families that do this not knowing they are outside of the law. It's just, you know, kind of that organic parents getting together and helping each other out. So what this bill does is it creates an exempt category of those exact situations with some guidelines of no more than 35 hours a week and no more than 4 children. And I will let Jenna explain the additional details with that. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this would exempt from the definition of either daycare facility or childcare facility an individual who provides care to care for less than 35 hours per week to 4 or fewer children, and not more than 2 of those children can be infants, which is defined in the section. And those individual, or those children are not related to the individual who is providing care for them.
Thank you, Jenna. And if we are truly concerned about making childcare available, to me, this is a way to accomplish that without being over burdensome and allowing those families to have the right and the ability to choose those situations with these guardrails in place. That's our offer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Jenna. I just want to double check on this, that 35 hours for kids, is it 35 hours total and you have the 4 kids, so divide it up? Or, you know, I have 10 with this kid, 5 with this one, so forth? Or is it 35 hours total, no matter how many, whether you had 1 kid or 4? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, I believe that this total would be an aggregate.
Okay.
Can you clarify that? So aggregate means summed up, and I don't know that that was your intent.
I guess the way I was picturing it when I drafted it was that it would be the total amount of time that you're watching one or more children per week. So if you're watching one child for 10 hours and then another one, you know, you're watching one on Monday, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday, that would still all count towards your total 35 hours per week. If that's not clear, I'll be happy to draft up language that would.
Correct. I want it like any other provider would do. I can have siblings for 35 hours a week. Yes, just like you would in any, you know, you don't aggregate childcare center hours. This would be, I could have 4 children, each for 35 hours a week is the intent.
Okay, that's how I read it, and if that's not the way it's written, it should be, I would say. So your goal is to allow a person to watch 4 kids for 35 hours, up to 4 kids for 35 hours.
Let me give a very specific example that might clarify it. So as an educator, as a teacher, if there are 4 teachers' kids that need watched while that teacher is teaching, that one provider could watch all 4 of those children 35 hours that week. Does that help? And that's what it does.
guess, so you explained that well. So it is, just, I get it and make sure I have it in my head. It is that I could, if I was saying I could put myself out there and say I'm willing to watch kids instead of be in the legislature, which is not all that different. I could say, I'm going to watch kids, and I could watch 4 kids for 35 hours a week, and I could charge for that. And I would evade all the licensing requirements and everything else that's required if I were to have 5 kids.
Correct. And this would be what we are referring to as an exempt home-based provider.
So I appreciate the amendment, and this is something that I have been trying to address this entire time, and I think we brought it up quite a few times in the interim committee, and I also brought it up during the hearing of the bill, and I didn't know that there was a difference. I thought we were limiting all daycare, all home daycare facilities to only 20 hours, but it seems like we were limiting the non-licensed or the exempt ones to 20 hours. And this is a much needed improvement on that, in my opinion, so. I think we're all okay with the amendment. Do you have a question?
Yes, so it says 35 hours per week to 4 or fewer children, not more than 2 of whom are infants. So you can't have 4 infants. Okay. But it can be, infant is up to what age? I didn't read the definition.
It's 12 months.
Okay. So I just wanted to be clear that whoever is going to be having a childcare facility understands that they can go to 35 hours per week, but not more than 2 infants can be in that daycare. Thank you.
I believe that's all we have, unless you all have something you would like to address. Anything from any of the other members?
We have I believe there's a technical amendment from the cleanup from all the discussions on the floor, and then Representative Probst has one change he wants to point out.
I can start with as this is being passed out. This is all the technical language. I want to draw the committee's attention to one thing. I guess I'll wait till this is out. Okay. Committee will forgive me a little bit. This is, I've not had a lot of time to spend with this, so we've, as you know, just this morning, yeah. So the main things we're doing on this is cleaning up some of the language that gets messy whenever you combine several pieces of legislation, but some things that are, I may have somebody help me out with this, but one of the things, there was an oversight when we gave the new appointments, one to the House and one to the Senate that came on your amendment. Originally in the initial bill, we took 2 appointments away from the governor's office to make that happen, and in our discussions, we changed that, and she retained the same number, and we added. That didn't get in, and that's been addressed in here. And then I'll let the reviser explain if there's any, maybe just, that's probably a better process.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, just to point out the makeup of the Kansas Children's Cabinet, I have a separate balloon to address that I can distribute after you dispatch with this one. But I did want to point out just a few things on the technical. It is largely just cleanup of language and cross-references. I will point out on page 7 and line 23, There is a direction for the secretary to update rules and regulations on or before July 1st of 2024. That would be difficult if the bill goes into effect on July 1st of 2024. So you see the standard 6-month date of January 1st, 2025 for updating those rules and regs there. Then on page 15, in lines 3 and 4, in establishing the new Kansas Office of Early Childhood, I believe there was language in earlier legislation that would have stated it would be established within the executive branch. That language isn't included in the technical. It is not legally necessary to state that, but if the conferees would like to have that specified in the bill, we can easily add that to this balloon.
That was the other issue I was going to add, is that we struck Department of Commerce, and I think it's just, otherwise it feels like a dangling participle.
On page 19, if you look in line 14, we would add the director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet to the positions that are to be appointed by the executive director of the Office of Early Childhood. Just a cleanup there that was needed to be done under this bill. Go to the next one. Yes, on page 39. At the top, new section 46 is my understanding that new section 46 regarding expenditure of funds and not to be expended for reimbursement to providers for unfilled childcare slots is to apply both immediately on July 1st of this year and on July 1st, 2026 to the new Kansas Office of Early Childhood. So you see a new subsection B out to the margin there that explicitly makes it applicable to the secretary under Article 5 of Chapter 65. So it retains the application to the secretary both before and after July 1st of 2026. Then on the next page, this is in the Kansas Children's Cabinet. On page 40, there are explicit provisions for the members to serve terms of 4 years. So for that reason, on page 41, lines 1 and 2 are being stricken because the voting members would not serve at the pleasure of the appointing authority if their terms are specified at 4 years. If you would rather they serve at the pleasure of the appointing authority, then we would need to amend the provisions on page 40 and not specify terms for the members.
That was the intent, was to have them serve at the pleasure.
Okay, then I can make the appropriate adjustments to take out the term specification of 4 years and have them serve at the pleasure of the appointing authority. The next change I would point your direction to is all the way back on page 71. You'll see a new section, section 59 is added to the bill. This is to amend one of the statutes regarding the Parents as Teachers programs and simply cleans up the definition since this is being moved over under the administration of the Executive Director of the Office of Early Childhood. It just cleans up that definition and that statute that was not originally included in the bill. And then the only other thing I would point out with respect to the technical balloon is on the last page is the language for the tax credit. It is my understanding that that tax credit has been increased to an amount equal to 100% in a tax conference bill at this point, and so I just bring that to the conferee's attention, that to avoid a direct conflict in the statute, you can take it out of this bill and leave it to the tax conferees to determine that policy, or you.
So if we change it to 100 here, then it would be in compliance with that, whether it happened or not?
That's correct. There would no longer be a direct conflict.
Okay, I don't have a problem with that. The more we can do to help, yeah, okay, good.
That's all I had, Madam Chairman.
Just for the record, the discussion we had about page 15 and putting in the executive branch, we were all okay with that, right? Okay. I just wanted that on the record.
Jason, can you show me where the appointment for the executive director is? The appointment clause?
Yes, the appointment is on page 15, and if you look in line 7, it specifies that the governor shall appoint the executive director of early childhood. Page 15, line 7. And I would add that that is subject to Senate confirmation.
And that's not for a specific term either, it's just at the will of the appointee?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jason, I'm looking at page 7 on line 22 and 23. The Secretary of Health and Environment shall adopt rules and regulations regarding child ratios on or before July 1, 2024, moving it to July 1, 2025. My question is, since it's minor, I know that you guys moved it back due to, that's not a lot of time, this bill goes into effect July 1. Would it be completely unprecedented to move it to August 1st, 2024, since it is minor and they know it's coming?
I would not presume to speak for the agency as to how quickly they can draft and have new regulations approved. That is an expedited timeline, given the normal process for adoption of amendments to rules and regulations. Having said that, it is your legislation. You can place whatever date on that you desire. I just suggested a later date so as to avoid the impossibility of adopting them on July 1st.
Thank you. I wish that my husband would speak to me the way that you just did, so. August 1st? Okay.
If I might add, my colleague here is more versed on rules and regulation procedure. There is a public hearing and public notice period, and so we would recommend at least a 90-day period for that. So perhaps October 1st of 2024.
I would feel more comfortable with that. Look at that compromise.
Jason, instead of me thumbing through this, the appointment for the Children's Cabinet, can you tell me what page that's on? Yeah.
I believe that section starts on page 39 and runs through pages 40 and 41.
The question I have that I just want to throw out to the committee to see if there's any appetite for it is we have several legislative appointments and to the Children's Cabinet, and it's the way it's written, it would require that they be members of the legislature, but there might be appointments we'd want to make that aren't. And I just wonder if we want to, if there would be any appetite to entertain allowing the flexibility where it could be a legislative member or it could be somebody who's not in the legislature who would take that legislative appointment.
I would be more comfortable leaving it as a legislative appointment because it keeps us close to the situation and we'll be able to communicate to the rest of the legislature what's going on in the Children's Cabinet.
Mr. Chair, we're comfortable with leaving the 6, 3 from the House, 3 from the Senate as legislators. Is there anything else on 96? Are we all in agreement? On the technical that we just went over, is everyone good? Okay, and Mr. Chair?
Thank you. I think I have one more amendment. I might let the revisor explain this, but I think this is another sort of technical thing that is a cleanup from when we had added some when we changed the appointment process, we had added some, and then we made changes later as we negotiated. And this then strikes out the language of, because I think when we took the 2 away from the governor, we gave one to the Speaker Pro Tem and we gave one to the Vice President of the Senate. And now what we've done in all the other amendments and everything added to the majority leader of each chamber. And now we had to come back and strike this. I think that's, am I correct in that, Jason?
So this moves 2 of the appointments to the Children's Cabinet from legislative appointments to the governor. So the governor would go back to 5 members of the public to be appointed, and the legislature after this, and with the addition of the earlier amendment, would have 6 appointments for the voting members. So it would be 6 and 5 would be the breakdown between legislative members and governor appointments.
Okay, so are we in agreement on Senate Bill 96 with the amendments and changes we've just made? Good. Okay, before we leave, we do need to go over 467 now that we have the language that we agreed upon earlier from the reviser, Charles Reimer, just to make sure we're all clear on that before we stick a fork in it. So we'll ask Charles just to go over the language, make sure it's with the intent that we agreed upon earlier, and then we'll be out.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So this is Section 1, new Section 1 of House Bill 2387, which the committee had indicated in its prior meeting that would be added into Senate Bill 467, in addition to other provisions from 2387. So these are some changes that were made with the assistance of our one of our budget revisers, just basically to make sure the dates are right. The dates here provide time for revenue to be able to certify amounts. They probably need about 60 days to do that. The dates here also allow for the first transfer from the fund to an account that will then go to the star bond districts that that have their revenue stream reduced due to the reduction in food sales tax. So one item I would note is that this bill, that is 467 with the amendments from 2387, with the portions from 2387, would be effective upon publication in the Kansas Register. And as the committee will recall, 467 currently does provide for publication in the Register, and that will give time for that May 1st, 2024 transfer. So if there are any questions on that, I'd be happy to.
I think that looks good. Thank you very much. And then we have the other two changes, but we were just basically pulling that language. So is that all?
Yes, I will
467.
create, I have not created that report yet, but I will do so. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was on board with this.
Okay, are we all good with that? Okay.
I guess, would the committee want to wait for Representative Bourgeon and we can sign? Okay. Madam Chair, if we still have the mics on, I might just visit a little bit about the committee report on 25-7. Is that okay? Are we still online and everything? All right. So there was one additional change that I made to the report on 2570, and that change was approved by the parties. It's just striking, I don't know if you still have that document that I handed out that shows the changes in red and blue. So if you don't, I can just pass this around. I mean, what it does is it just strikes 4 words on the section that dealt with the additional weeks of temporary unemployment. And actually, this change was the result of Senator Reddy's question, and as a result of that, I took a closer look at this language. And I think just removing these 4 words just makes things a little bit clearer. So, okay.